Meanwhile, as we were mentioning, we encourage everyone to do a short introduction on the chat. You can let us know where you're from and if there's any topic that you would like to also look into the session, if there's anything that you're looking forward from the session itself.
All right, so I hope you can see my screen well. So welcome to Let's Talk Digital Rights. Let's Talk Data-Centric Digital Rights Beyond Human Rights in the Digital Realm. So this is brought to you by the IO Foundation. I am Len Manriquez. I'm from the Philippines. I am the Programs Manager of the IO Foundation, and I will be moderating today's session together with my two colleagues. Today's session is packed. We really encourage you, especially those people who are in the room, to kindly participate in the session. We have a bit of an exercise for everyone. So the IO Foundation is a nonprofit organization. It's an NGO advocating for data-centric digital rights. It's born from a fundamental concern on digital rights, and its mission is to promote, protect, and provide solutions for digital rights. It aims to bridge technological and humanitarian perspectives, as data becomes increasingly powerful economically, politically, and socially in our lives. We see programmers as emerging and new players in the human rights and digital rights sphere. Yep, so this session, as I said earlier, is focused on data-centric digital rights and some aspect of what we can do as a society for it, and also some really practical and existing actions, working towards digital rights. With me are my two colleagues, John Caralt, the founder and CEO of the IO Foundation. He was inspired, to build the IO Foundation coming from a background of programming and system administration. He was greatly bothered for many years on the intrusion that technology has been, especially information and communications technology, has had in our lives. And he took this big leap, face your fears and try to contribute to finding solutions, as the world becomes more digital. Also together with me is Mariam Lee. She's been in the human rights sphere for a long time as well. And she's focusing on business and human rights in the IO Foundation. She's the IO Foundation Strategic Program Manager. All right. So let's do a bit of house rules. So in the IO Foundation, we adhere to the Chatham house rules, but we've kind of innovated this a little bit, and we call it the Datam house rule. It's a play of words. And in this space, we encourage you to ask for consent before you tag anyone of what you gather in this discussion. Although apparently this session is actually live, so we will be able to see everyone participating. Anyhow, in any case that you'll post this in your own personal social media accounts, take the extra step of asking for consent and before tagging the person you wanted to tag in your posts. So let's do a bit of a tech check. At this point, I'd like to encourage everyone to use the chat function of our platform. Could you please tell us if you're using a laptop or a mobile phone or a tablet? And we would also like to know, for those who are in Bali right now, are you using your own device, or are you co-sharing with your participants? Are you seated in a room? Would really like you to tell us over the chat what you're using. Anyone? I'm using a laptop, so I'll type laptop. So you can just type laptop, mobile phone, or tablet, or desktop if you're using desktop. Laptop, okay, so desktop, impressive. Handphone, okay, so some are using mobile phone, laptop. All right. Okay, that's great. Okay, so most of us are using our laptops. In this session, we'll use a few, what do you call this? We'll use a few of Zoom's tools, one of which is the annotate one. So I'd like to encourage you to try to use that function. So all you have to do is click on your view menu, view options, and click annotate, and choose between 1 to 5, with 1 as the lowest and 5 as the highest, on how ready are you right now for this session. So you could choose anything, in the annotate function. You could write your name, you could put a star, a smiley, a heart, however you wanted to do it. You could just scribble something. You could try to use that function. And 5 is being like, I'm totally all go for this, and 1 is like, oh, I would rather huddle myself in bed and sleep. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon and I'm full from lunch and I don't have the energy to do this session right now. So yeah. Okay, so I see people responding over the chat. You could try to use the annotate function. There's an annotate function at Zoom. I really would like you to try it, because later on there will be some exercises related to this. Okay, it feels like chat is the preferred response area for interaction. Does anyone, we have the annotate function activated, right? I think so. Some may not
It is
have.
possible to be activated, but I'm thinking that those who might be accessing the web, so it might be on the desktop version of it, but not on the web one.
Okay, awesome. Okay, no problem then. Okay, there's another one. So this one is still a rate from 1 to 10. So with 1 is the lowest and 10 is the highest. How confident, are you with technology? So please rate it. So the arrow down is the lowest one and the arrow up is the highest one. Okay, I see responses from the chat. So most people have 4, 3. Wow, that's really below the median point. Okay, 5. There's someone who was, okay, 2, 5. Okay, we get it. We get it. Okay, so without any further answers to this one, I think everyone's going to answer 5 below. So there's really no trust in technology at the moment. I'd like to ask my colleague, the founder and CEO, John Carral, to please talk to us about digital rights and our role in it, what we can do to increase that number, from probably 5 below to something like 6 above, maybe even beyond 10. John, take it away. Thank you, everyone.
Just waiting for my screen to be shared. Can anyone confirm that you can see my screen? Just gonna be double checking here, because for some reason I cannot see it myself. One of those. Talk about trusting technology. Is it coming up? I may need another double confirmation here.
Not yet.
Not yet.
No, it says you're sharing a screen, but it's just black.
That's interesting. So how about I do this, because I have observed this behavior before. Forcing the refresh. Yeah.
Now it's working.
Okay.
Yeah.
So much for trusting technology. Okay. All right. Apologies for these technical glitches. It's always happening when the least that you need or you expect. Thanks everyone again for joining the session today. We're going to jump a little bit more into content right now. And as Len has mentioned, my name is Jean-François. You can call me John. And I manage and started the IO Foundation. Now, I would like to start with an element of having a look very quickly at public technology. What's the status right now of public technology? It's a very curious status. The more I try to compare it with other industries, and the more that I pay attention to the regulations that are happening around the world, you know, things such as data protection laws, for instance, it becomes very, very interesting how there is a dystopian situation and a kind of cognitive dissonance between what we would expect in terms of protection and what really is happening in terms of implementation of the reality. So right now, what we have is a situation where we have access to infrastructure, services, and products that are supposed to be compliant with a number of regulations that are supposed to be, in turn, protecting us. And yet we don't really have an ability to verify whether that compliance is really happening or not. So to give you an example, when I buy a smartphone or a car, I can have pretty much the reassurance that there's been an agency from the government that has been double checking a prototype prior to be put on the market of that device, of that product. And it has gone through a number of tests, and those tests are standardized. And the manufacturers for the car and also for the mobile phone know exactly what are the tests that are going to be run, so they can prepare themselves to be compliant. And there is a team that is going to be running those verifications. And at the end of it, if you are compliant enough, if you fall into a certain degree of acceptability, depending on the industry, you're going to get a certificate or a chop or a sticker, whatever it's going to be. Once you obtain that certification, then you can go into the market, you can mass produce and sell to the customer. And so the customer knows, the citizen knows that there is a certain degree of reassurance that, you know, the car is going to break, that the airbags are going to function, or that the battery is not going to explode on your face, which are the typical things that we'll be concerned about when using physical devices. What is very interesting is that that doesn't apply to anything that has to do with public consumption software. And that is a very dystopian, strange type of situation, because right now, the reality is that, for instance, an online banking platform could claim to be, let's say, GDPR compliant with the European regulations. As a user of the bank, when connecting online to the website, there is no easy way for me at all to verify whether they are really compliant or not. There is no way for me to verify that claim of compliance. And one step beyond, not even the authorities can very much verify that. What this company can do, what the bank can do, is hire a very expensive consultant and have them go through the code base, verify the whole thing, and sign a paper that, yes, we certify that this customer is actually complying with this or that jurisdiction's regulations. That is not really what you want. You don't buy a car with the hope that they're going to be compliant. And if there's an accident, then we'll see what is necessary in order to sue the manufacturer. That's not the way we function. But when it comes to technology, that is exactly the type of assumption that we're doing. And it's a very strange one. And so the question that I always like to ask myself is, what's wrong with this particular picture? And the issues come from a number of places. And there would be two fallacies that I typically like to point out, and that have been sort of the consequence of all of these misguiding type of decisions that we have done when it comes to technology. The first one is the assumption that all of you are nothing short of being a hacker. And what I mean by that is that as a consumer and citizen, you need to understand what your device does, how to configure your device, how to install software in the device, how to protect your device, how to lock down settings on your device so that you don't leak more information. You need to know how to generate safe passwords. You need to know how to store those safe passwords. You need to have a policy for a different password for each of one of the different services that you're doing. You need to possibly get to understand the terms and conditions for each of one of those services. You need to update your antivirus or your anti-malware. You need to know what malware is. You need to, it's just too crazy. It's just too much. Everything that we're doing right now when it comes to digital safety is putting more pressure into the shoulders of the final user. And that is just not going to be sustainable. Because on the same token, if you think about it, the situation that we are exposing the users to would be the equivalent as every single person, every time that they go into a new building to get a master's degree in order to understand whether the building is going to collapse on them or not, for every single building that they enter, for every single city that they visit. That would never be something that we consider acceptable. So the question is, why are we putting that into the shoulders of the users? It's not really, no, it doesn't make any sense. Now, the second fallacy is the element of nothing to hide. Oh, I got nothing to hide, so why do I care about privacy? There's no problem, etc., etc. Edward Snowden put it very, very well. He said very clearly that arguing that you don't care about the right to privacy because you have nothing to hide is akin to saying that you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. We must remember that privacy is not only about us, it's about everyone too. And if I want to be able to keep some of my elements private, I also have to be defending the needs and the rights for others to keep their information private. And so that transpires into, it's not about the people having to, it should be the technology that implements it transparently for them so that no one has to worry about whether the information is being used, extracted, or even weaponized against them. Now, if any of you believes that you have nothing to hide, I invite any of you to just put your PIN number on the chat for your debit card or credit card. I'm pretty sure some of us will know exactly what to do with it. That would be just a very simple example. There's always something that you're going to be wanting to keep for yourself for one reason or for another, typically because of societal rules. And those are very much to be respected and pay attention to. Now, let's look at what would be, or what we identify as the problem and its origin. Why is it that we are in this particular pickle of a situation? Why is technology not protecting us by design? What is the issue here? So for us, the main core element is really understanding the nature of data. And this has been a very curious situation as well that we've been facing in these years, as if it feels as if data was considered like this magical dust that is around us, as if we were part of the Lord of the Rings and we're living in the Middle Earth, and there's a dust that is pure magic, and some wizards can take a piece of it and put it into a cauldron, a black box that does things, and all of a sudden a magic result come out of it to be able to predict trends or the weather or even consumer behavior and so forth. And the reality is couldn't be further from that. There is a huge connection between us and the data that we generate. And in fact, it's so big that you cannot really unlink it. And if you think about it, it's quite self-evident. If I tell you, for instance, number 5 is just the value and is measuring something. I'm not giving you a context of what number 5 is. And you may wonder, 5, what are you measuring? What is it that you're talking about? And I can tell you, well, it's, let's say, money. And the next question is, yeah, but which currency? Oh, it's going to be dollars. Okay, dollars from where? There's plenty of places that use the word dollars or inside the currency. And it's always Australian dollars, let's say. Now you have an understanding about what that measure is, and you can fully contextualize the use for that measure. Now, the moment that you have done that, you have linked that to the actual bill of 5 Australian dollars. And if you remove any of that context, the value also disappears. So if I start removing the origin of the country in which that money is applicable for, you will keep wondering, okay, so $5, but from where? And so what's important to understand is that in order for data to have any value, it requires full contextualization, or at least enough partial contextualization so that it can be used for a certain purpose. And that creates that absolute link between the source entity that has generated the data and what we call a representational entity based on the model of the data that it creates, that it's extracted from. Now, when it comes to people, the question is exactly, well, what kind of data we are extracting from people? Well, it's quite simple. We are extracting 3 types of data mostly, and even though this is an oversimplification, but it will work for the purpose of this talk. Elements that have to do with your body, and what I mean by that is your characteristics, features of yourself. You know, your height, your weight, the color of your hair, the color of your eyes, whether you have any medical condition, whether you the kind of things that you wear, the clothes that you have, etc., etc., etc. And by the way, there's very interesting systems, very cunning systems to extract most of this information. There's also the element that is typically the most controversial, which is your mind. And I'm not talking about a mystical, conceptual vision of the mind. It's about the black box of your own personality that sits in your brain. If I get to know any of you personally, the first time that we interact, I barely know anything from you except possibly elements of the body type of data. But as we share, let's say, a dinner, I'm going to be probing your personality. I'm going to get to know a little bit more. What are your tastes? What do you like? What may be your political affiliation? What may be your religious affiliation? Where was the last place that you went into holidays? And therefore kind of figuring out if you prefer mountain or beach, that kind of thing. And so what new technology is allowing us is to be able to extract that information in a much more efficient way, which is essentially the black box happening in your mind. And by the way, the questions that we did at the very beginning of this session, asking you about your feelings and your degree of confidence, is a way to extract that information too. We got to know things that otherwise we have not been able to learn from you. And so the important part here is that with that particular information, we get to learn what are the trigger buttons that you may have and how to activate them in order to entice a specific reaction from you, and whether it be a consumer reaction, whether it be a change of a political party to, you know, modify the results of the elections in the next cycle. Last but not least, of course, there is the element of activities where devices and technology is tracking where do you go, who do you meet, how long you stay in a certain place, etc., etc. And so when you combine all of these things, you realize that all of that information is essentially creating a digital twin of you. In the lingo, that's typically how it's called. You have a model that has extracted in as much as possible information that has to do with your physicality, what happens in your head, and where do you move and where do you interact with your environment. And with that, you can essentially predict with very high accuracy a number of things about what you're going to do in the future, or what are going to be your reactions and your decisions. And it can be extremely weaponized against you. There's also the question about where that resides. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves here is, what kind of digital world do we want to exist? And I'm not talking about you physically. It's the one that is going to be hosting your profile, your digital twin. And by the way, may I remind you that we don't have only one digital twin. Facebook will have one, Twitter will have another one, Instagram has another one, although it pertains on the Facebook exactly. Google has another one, and each of one of them will have different pieces on that model, able to predict different things and able to have a different visualization, if you will, on how you look like. Now, there's a very interesting component here that I'm very curious to see unfolding in the coming years, which is digital impersonation. And this is where things get even more interesting. If you have ever heard about the Turing Test, the Turing Test is essentially a test whereby I'm going to be confronted with a chat, and I'm going to be interacting with someone else on the other side of the chat, and I don't know if that other someone else is a person or an algorithm, a piece of software. And the Turing Test says that if given enough time until I decide to give up, I cannot make the difference as to whether I'm speaking with a person or with a piece of software, then that software, if it's a software, the software has passed a Turing test. It has shown a behavior in a way of interaction that is akin to a human interaction and therefore can fool me. So the question here is, when it comes to online interactions, there are also elements based on the body, mind, and activities that I was mentioning before in terms of how do I behave online. It's not in terms of conversation anymore, but what kind of websites that I visit, what kind of usage of my mouse, or what kind of typing habits that I have, what will be my procedure when I interact with a specific provider. And so what's going to be interesting is as we collect more and more of that information and we are able to impersonate digitally others, who is going to say and who's going to be making the difference between me attempting a digital heist by attacking an online banking and someone else having enough information about my behavior online to be able to impersonate me online and carry on with that attack, so that a judge will not be able to make the difference as to whether it was me or it was my digital impersonation. That is a thought that personally frightens me, and I don't think that we have right now any single methodology that is clearly well defined in order to avoid any of that. So how do we move in terms of trying to avoid all of these things? That has been pretty much the corpus of the body of work of the IO Foundation. And we identified a number of stakeholders that are critical, of course, in order to get into solutions. And you can imagine that in any other complex system, there is no such thing as just involving a couple of stakeholders. It's a much more complex system than that. And you can see in the slide that we're talking about governments, supranational organizations, civil society, of course, corporates, they can't be dropped from the equation, academia, and very, very importantly, programmers. For us, as my colleague has mentioned before, we identify programmers, technologists in general, but specifically programmers. And there's a reason for that. It's because every single piece of technology that we interact with has always a layer of software. That is the one that we interact with the technology through. And so being able to embrace and bring into the conversation programmers really solves a huge part of the problem at once. And so we see them as these next generation of rights defenders that haven't been properly provided with the tools to understand what is their role, but also to be able to implement it. Because so far we've been speaking to them in very policy-related terms, and what they expect is much more technical terms. You cannot expect someone to be told, you need to implement software that is going to be considering, say, freedom of expression, because freedom of expression is not something that you can code easily. And you can't even define it from a technical perspective easily. And so they get lost into those languages, and what they require is to be able to provide technical taxonomies, technical documents, technical interpretations. And this is one of the issues that we see, for instance, on the current data protection laws anywhere in the world, where they only remain in the form of a policy document that explains things from a legal perspective, that tells you what are the rights that you have access to, yet dismisses the translation of that information into a technical standard that programmers can understand. The consequence is that basically you have 25 different platforms implementing their compliance with GDPR in 25 different ways. Good luck being able to assess compliance in such a universe. And there is, in order to understand exactly how deep this goes, there's always this joke that I always find extremely nerdy and yet very, very accurate, whereby it says, I would love to change the world, but they won't give me the source code. Well, that is real when it comes to the to our physical world. We can't really change the nature of the universe, not yet anyway. But when it comes to technology, we are the ones who are creating the technology. We get to have the source code of what the program is going to be behaving as, and therefore we can specifically and proactively take care of a number of things to avoid problems to begin with. So the way we observe data-centric digital rights in the IO Foundation is a little bit summarized in that slide. I can go for about a couple of hours explaining the whole thing, so I don't have that much time here. I'm going to have to summarize it very, very much. But as you can see on the top row, we have considered human rights as essentially things that can happen across humans in a much more universal way. And we identified a number of human harms, so harms that could be applied to people. And based on that, we were able to construct what would be the rights that you want to enact into people in order to attempt proactively to avoid those harms. And so, for instance, not being able to express yourself is cause for a lot of harm for many reasons. And that harm was identified, and so we decided there was such thing as freedom of expression, that is a right that is reflected in the UDHR, for instance. Now, those documents that reflect all of those international rights, or even sometimes constitutional rights, are reflected by a number of documents and embraced by a number of organizations, as you can see there as well. Again, it's a very summarized type of slide. And that comes with a number of duties of care from part of the implementers of those rights, let's say governments and even supranational organizations, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what we decided to look at in the IO Foundation was, okay, when it comes to human rights, it's clear that what's at the core of that conversation is humans. It's in the name. But when we look at digital rights, we figured out that humans were not playing a part in there, because humans are not encoded into the platform, into the technology. It's data that is. And so we decided to look at it from the perspective of data instead. What were the possible harms that data could be subject to? Again, considering that data is the reflection, is the digital twin of a specific person, but it could also be from a table or the weather. It doesn't really matter from a technical perspective. You're still handling data in any way. And so our approach was to look into, well, if you can have a list of potential harms for the data, then we can actually construct a definition of those from a technical perspective that programmers can understand, technologists can understand. And on top of that, then we can do the next step where we can build a number of digital rights, which are also defined from a technical perspective. And putting that together, it provides the necessary tools for programmers to be able to design, architect, and implement software and services that are going to be, by design, already avoiding a number of potential harms that they can name. You see, the problem that they have right now when it comes to feeling participant of the situation is that there is no language for them to bridge between what they create and the impact that they have. This huge gap here has no language at the moment, specifically has no technical language. And so how do you can get behind, how you can have someone behind a specific ethos of trying to defend something if they cannot even put a name into it? That's extremely complicated. And so it's also one of the reasons why you don't have liability systems in software engineering. An architect or a doctor will have to go through a series of not only certifications, but also, say, for instance, doctors, they swear the Hippocratic Oath, promising and swearing that they will be doing anything necessary to save lives, no matter what. Well, they can actually do that because they can put a name to saving lives. There's language to describe that, and they can understand that, and they can talk to other doctors into deciding what's going to be the path, because they can name the kind of chemicals they're going to provide in cancer treatment, for instance, or for a cold, or for whatever it is. And so having the language is really what allows you to get behind a specific motivation, a specific ethos, and that's what they're missing at the moment when it comes to programmers. So the question, of course, coming up is, how do we fix this? And it's not that I'm going to claim that the IO Foundation has all the solutions by far, because this is a big complex system that will require, as I was mentioning before, the collaboration of plenty of organizations moving forward. But definitely we've been designing a number of initiatives, and the first one would be kind of the core initiative for us, which is a Universal Declaration of Digital Rights, which is a compendium of all of the concepts that I was mentioning before, from the identification of the taxonomies to modification of the educational pipeline, to make sure that we have enough information and understanding for programmers as to how to move forward, but also libraries, or we call it Digital Rights SDK, that companies and software developers could incorporate directly into the architecture, and that would provide a layer of abstraction between data manipulation for the users, for instance, and the business logic, so that you don't have to bother yourself as to how you're going to be dealing with the user's data, because that's done for you already in a standard way, in a compliant way, in a way that has already been verified by organizations and by agencies, and you can concentrate exclusively on your business logic. The next one has been trying to tackle with the programmers at the sort of providing them with the tools that they need. So we run this initiative called TechUp. We have one monthly event. By the way, that's the QR code for you to check it out if you are interested. What we do is we provide them with tools every month with capacity building activities and so forth. We also run some working groups for other things in the space, but also some recurrent sessions on other topics such as BHR and tech, which I will mention shortly after as well. What we attempt with this is to basically provide, as I was mentioning, all the tools necessary for programmers to turn into agents of change across time, which is the reason why we do it on a monthly basis and not something that you can do once a year, because if you have once a year summit, people 2 weeks later have forgotten everything that you've been discussing about. So this has to be a very long-term type of effort. And finally, and one of the other things that we do is we look into business and human rights in technology, and my colleague Mariam is going to be giving you much more details on this. Now, since we identify programmers as this core stakeholder in the whole conversation, we thought that, well, we needed to provide them with a little bit of guidance, or at least provide a beginning of a conversation on how this could look like. And everyone is throwing principles left and right. Every single document that you see, there's a number of basic principles, et cetera, and we really didn't want to get into that ocean of too many concepts. We wanted to keep it as short and sweet as possible, and specifically to have that kind of concise definition that would act a little bit as in this Gemini cricket type of thing of Pinocchio, giving you the voice of consciousness to change easily your paradigm of thinking when you are programming, when you are designing technology. And so we came up with this, what we call the DCDR principles, the Data-Centric Digital Rights principles. And they are quite straightforward. The first one is I am my data. And you can summarize it thinking that you should treat somebody else's data as you would like to be treated. This really recognizes the importance and the connection between me and my data, and as a consequence between somebody else's and their data. And therefore, when I'm treating their data, I have to look into the fact that I am treating them as well by extension. And so if I'm hurting their data, I'm also hurting that person. And that may change a little bit the rationalization of what we're doing with information when we are programming. Now, there's a very interesting consequence here to that particular principle as well. If we accept for a moment that there is this strong connection, and we can do the link between my physicality and the data and the model that it does, then comes the question as to did it or did not constitutional law also protect my data in the same fashion that it protects my physicality? We have an ongoing conversation or train of thought going on with this, which could even lead to the point of wondering whether data protection laws were ever necessary to begin with, because maybe we had already other mechanisms that were proven that had been already there for the longest time. I'm not saying that they're perfect, that's not my point. My point is that maybe we were just reinventing the wheel and we had already certain things to be able to protect that data of ours. Principle number 2 is end remedy, and this is sort of rooted on pillar number 3 from the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, where there is an attempt on accessibility towards remedy. When it comes to technology, it's actually kind of the opposite. You would want to avoid remedy as much as possible. What I mean to say by that is if you can architect a software that avoids the problem, that avoids the grievance to begin with, then you don't really need remedy. So for instance, in GDPR, if I have, say access to deletion of my data, and so I request Facebook, for instance, to delete my data, I don't want to have only the ability to sue Facebook if I discover that they haven't complied with my request. What I wanted is for my request to happen. End of the story. I don't have to be concerning myself months down the road whether that happened or not. So I want the technology to be able to implement that transparently for me. And so I want the programmers to have in their mind, let's try to avoid remedy systems as much as possible by avoiding the grievances directly into my algorithms. Now, the third principle is rights by design, and this one is quite straightforward. We feel that anything that is a right that is given to you when it comes to regulations in your own jurisdiction should be embedded into the technology itself. We're not talking about privacy by design here only. We are talking about essentially any single regulation that has to do with technology under which I'm supposed to be covered by me being a citizen of a specific jurisdiction. The question is, why do I have to have that responsibility on my shoulders, which is the fallacy of the hacker that I was mentioning before. Instead, all of those should be transparently implemented in the technology itself so that when I acquire it, I don't have to concern myself as to whether that is going to be compliant or not. Well, guess what? That's exactly what happens when you buy a car. You buy a car, and you know there's an airbag, and you know there's a seatbelt, and you know there's some brakes, and they're going to function. And I don't have to concern myself as to whether they function or not. I have to concern myself about being a good driver, because it is a dangerous tool and I can actually crush myself or kill someone else. That's as far as it goes. And so really the shift of mentality that citizens need to do into what do they expect of technology is more towards what has been already proven as something that functions in other industries, rather having to rechange the mentality as we have had right now, in which all of a sudden everything is our responsibility and we have to be the last guardians on what happens with our data and the technology that we use. That's really not going to be sustainable at all long term. So you might ask yourself, give me some examples about how this translates into, okay? All of this is very pretty, it's very theoretical. How does it translate? Well, how about your settings? How about the fact that, for instance, you don't like sharing your data with third parties, meaning to say you're going to be entering into an agreement with a bank to open a bank account, and one of the options is check here in order to share your data with third-party companies, not even from their own group, but third-party companies. And I said, no, I'm not interested in this kind of behavior. I mean, I'm entering into a negotiation with you in terms of a service. That's fine. At most, with companies from your group, that might not be so happy, but okay. But third parties that have nothing to do with this, no, there's no reason for it. The thing is, at the moment, the way things are, you actually have to double check that in every single terms of use that you enter into. So you have to check that with Facebook, you have to check that with Twitter, you have to check that with Instagram, you have to check that with every single platform that you do. Well, wouldn't it be much more reasonable that it is a setting of your life that goes with you no matter where you go, that filters the type of services or applications that you have in your app store, for instance, based on those settings? So I don't want to be offered any single video game or any single application that is expecting of me to share my data with a third party. Click, setting, apply, end of the story. And so that should be something that just simplifies your interaction with technology, and you shouldn't have to be concerning yourself all the time as to, oh, what did I share now? What happened here? And try to read 35 pages of absolute nonsense language that you're not prepared for because you're not a lawyer. And they are, in fact, designed most of the time for you to not be able to understand them anyway. So that would be a very simple example that could be very easy to implement and applicable at any given time. Now, the reason, and this is always the way I like to part in my talks, the reason why I'm being so strong about this is because, seriously, we are not the people anymore. We are the cyborgs. And if you believe that that is an overstatement, I invite you to send me your smartphones by courier, and we will have this conversation again in a week's time. The technology that we're using on a daily basis has become so fundamental to everything that we do that it doesn't require to be fusion with our body to be an absolute part of our lives. The only difference between having a smartphone on my hand, or having it, melted into my body is the interface. And when it comes to having it in your hand, your interface is your eyes and your thumbs mostly. And so don't think that it's a separate element of you. It isn't anymore. You're required to work. You're required to be in touch with your loved ones. You're required to do a lot of things. And specifically right now, in terms of the pandemic, it's absolutely crucial for you. So we have come to a point where we have assimilated technology into our daily activities every single time. Protecting that piece of thing that we have incorporated in such an intimate way with us is fundamental. There's no way to stress this much more. And think about companies such as, for instance, Neuralink from Elon Musk, that are developing chips that are going to be interfacing directly with your brain. That's not going to be a joke. And so right now we don't have an infrastructure, we don't have regulations, we don't have standards, technical standards of implementation, so that those things and those potential risks are avoided by design. So we should really have paying attention to this, change the way that we are looking at technology, invite technologies much more into civil society. We need to give them incentives to come and join us. We need to find ways for them to have a career in civil society as a technology. We need to be able to entice them to think that in the same fashion that you can get behind the idea of saving the planet by getting into organizations that are trying to work for climate change, well, programmers should feel enticed to move into civil society to be able to change how technology is being used because they understand the harms that they can be creating. And right now, that's a very tough sell because they don't have the language to understand it. Thank you. Back to you, Len.
Thank you, John, and thank you for that challenge. I feel like the rest of our participants, oops, sorry about that. Need a little bit of time to think that through and to also, have the chance to think about ways how to work with us and how to take action. Okay, so that's already almost half of our 2.5 hours of this session. We would like to take a 5-minute break for you to stretch a little bit and, grab water, go to the bathroom, get coffee or something. I'm gonna play a timer here for that, and we'll be back after 5 minutes.
Meanwhile, if anyone also wants to pose any question on the chat, feel free to do so. Feel free to do so, and we will get back to you after the break.
All right. I hope everyone is back. Oops, sorry about that. Before we proceed to the next session, I would like to encourage everyone, either you use the annotate function if you have the opportunity to do that, or via chat. How would you rate the importance of technologists? And by technologists, we mean software developers, software architects, engineers, programmers, in today's time. So you can use the chat function, or you can annotate at the presentation. This is from 1 to 10, with 1 as the lowest and 10 as the highest. Please let us know what you think. John says it's 12. That's beyond the scale. Wow, 10. So from a very low trust to technology to a very high rate of importance to technologists. This is really telling us something, huh? All right, so I get mostly 10 from you guys, but that's really something to think about. Now, if you recall our questions earlier, at what rate would we, our level of trust and confidence to technologies, we said it's not going to be more than 5. But now we rate the importance of technologists as 10 and above. So I'll leave that to the room to think about. And second question, do you think technologists are next generation of rights defenders? You can annotate, or you can also respond at the chat. Yes, maybe, or no. You can also just write Y or N. Maybe. Maybe. So we got a lot of maybes right now. A couple of maybes, actually. So we have 1 yes. The maybes are ruling the room. I have 2 yeses and a couple, a lot more maybes. Okay, so that's good. That's a good response. Okay, so thank you for your participation. The next session is about business and human rights. My colleague, Mariam Lee, a human rights defender and a digital rights defender from Malaysia, who has been working on business and human rights, specifically in Malaysia, but also advocating for it in Southeast Asia, will be our main speaker for this session. Take it away, Mariam.
Thank you so much. So let me check, let me confirm if my screen is, people can see my screen?
Yep, you're starting with NAPs, with technological components.
Oh, hold on. All right.
Yep, it works now.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat petang semuanya. First of all, I would like to thank the Southeast Asia IGF for this space to share about what we've been working at the IO Foundation with regards to implementing the United Nations Guiding Principles, Business and Human Rights to the tech sector. I will do my best in the next 15 to 20 minutes to articulate the case for a specific thematic area for technology in a national action plan for business and human rights that countries around the world have committed to. Our work so far has focused on Malaysia, the country where I'm from, who already has a NAP on the way. Let me begin by stating what a national action plan is. Simply put, national action plans for business and human rights are policy documents in which a government articulates priorities, and actions it will take to protect human rights from business-related activities. Should there be a specific thematic area for technology in a national action plan? The short answer is yes. In fact, some countries like Japan, Switzerland, and Finland already have it, though they have it in very limited scope. Meanwhile, other countries like Poland, France, Luxembourg, Sweden, they mention it in passing in their own national action plans, referring to general protections of privacy, data protection, and regulation of online spaces from discriminatory and democracy-limiting effects. As of today, 26 countries have published a national action plan. You can check this out at the globalnaps.org. The earliest being the UK. They published it in 2013. They updated it in 2016. And the latest one being Japan, who published their national action plan in October 2020. In Asia, the first to officially adopt a national action plan was Thailand in 2019, and the latest one being Japan in October 2020. So there is a specific mention for technology and digital rights protection in Japan's area of focus. What Japan did is definitely a step in the right direction. However, very few of these existing NAPs currently address the specific impacts of human rights by the activities of tech companies, even though, as the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted, the potential scope of these impacts is very wide. Tech companies can play a positive role in enabling the exercise of human rights by, for example, enabling remote access to education and health services, but they can also pose risks to them through internet shutdowns, blocking access to information, privacy breaches, and the development of artificial intelligence solutions with discriminatory biases. Let me go to the next slide. Okay. Why do we need a tech component in the BHR National Action Plan? We believe that a specific thematic area for technology is necessary for a national action plan for business and human rights. The reason for this is because the analog reality is different from the digital reality. This is where it is important to understand the political economy of the digital economy. In pre-digital industrial capitalism, humans extract raw materials from nature and process them to become commodities to be sold in the market. In the digital economy, the process of manipulating raw materials to become sellable goods remains, but with a twist. Humans now become the raw materials in the form of data. We, us, you and me, we are the raw materials. Every time we post a Facebook status, every time we post a tweet, every time we send information about ourselves into an app or a machine to be processed or profiled, our data is the substance with which the predictive analytical tools are being created. Our human experiences are being put into a machine to produce predictive outputs, to answer the question of how you would behave and when, and basically to predict your future behavior. Not only are we the source of a commodity, but we are the commodity. Essentially, what is being sold here at the end is ourselves. And this has implications on how we function as a democratic society. If our data can be bought and sold, which means we can be bought and sold, it means those with the money to buy them can buy political power. What we do not want is for technology to facilitate the narrowing of democratic space, whether consciously or not. The impact of ubiquitous digital profiling of humans can be seen in many examples. In the first instance, despite being the source of data, in the current digital economic model, we are not the owners of our data. The insistence of data ownership over our own digital profiles or digital entities is not so that we could make money off of our data, even though that is very much possible. But in the same way that we don't sell our kidney just because we own our kidney, acknowledging that we are our data or the fact that we own it does not necessarily mean that we want to sell it. Secondly, who gets access and control over our data? Having acknowledged that there is no disembodiment between our physical bodies and our digital bodies, does it make sense to continue our lives in the digital space without proper protection? It would be like living in this physical world without the state mechanisms and institutions to protect the human rights of citizens, or conducting business with private entities that do not respect the rights of their customers. The difference, however, in the digital world, we could actually configure the data entity to protect itself the same way that a human would seek access to justice when our human rights are violated. Technologies like data encapsulation could give like a sense of awareness to the data entity to know whether or not it is being accessed and used by the right people and in the right way. This requires a level of control over our own data, something that we should have a right to, but it is currently being held back by governments and corporations alike to suit their interests. It now comes down to civil society to push for adequate legislative and technological protection of human rights in the technology sector. This effort has to come from the government as part of pillar number 1 in the United Nations Guiding Principles Business for Human Rights, the state duty to protect human rights of citizens, specifically principle number 9 of the Guiding Principles, that states should maintain adequate domestic policy space to meet their human rights obligations when pursuing business-related policy objectives, with the emphasis on adequate policy requirements, because legislation alone is not enough to govern technology. There needs to be technical translations of the legislation for it to make sense to programmers and developers, technologists who are building our digital infrastructure. It is them who will design and implement how our data is collected, where it is stored, and most importantly, how and when it is used. If we are not careful, we may fall into the trap of programming inequality, discrimination, and power imbalance into the technologies that we build. Another reason why there needs to be a thematic area in a national action plan for technology is because there needs to be a stance on digital surveillance. It is no secret that our devices and our apps are constantly listening to us. For Google Home to actually capture you saying, "Hey Google," the device literally has to be always listening. Same goes with the other voice-activated technologies that occupy our smart environment today. We've experienced it also when we are just having a chat with someone or expressing our desire for certain items, and then suddenly we receive advertisements for those items. They appear on our social media feed. It is no secret that e-commerce companies buy our data from telco providers and other sources. It is not even difficult to hack into our SMS or WhatsApp or Facebook messages. Hackers could remotely mirror your screen with sophisticated spywares that we don't even know how they work. Please don't get me wrong, technology is a wonderful thing. We cannot not use them. But the important thing right now is to ensure that the technologies we use are actually safe by design. Users should not have to carry the burden of always being on our toes when it comes to digital safety. In the case of digital surveillance, either state surveillance or corporate surveillance, most of the time this happens behind our back. The lack of transparency is by design, to keep us not knowing so that we do not protest. It is not just about what data Facebook has on us, it's about what Facebook has learned about us. What if Facebook gets it wrong? What if we actually like pink, but Facebook says we like yellow? And then we allow technologies like Facebook feed into an AI somewhere that makes decisions about what color paint to buy from the hardware store. Or worse, we allow Facebook to sell this information to the people buying them so that they could specifically target us to buy a specific color paint. Now imagine this being applied to politics. How many data points are being collected about us? They are collected about us, but not collected for us, okay? It is for the benefit of advertisers to make sure that they send the right messaging to our feed so that we buy a particular product or vote for a particular candidate. Surely, algorithms are not all bad, but it does become bad when the balance of power between those who know and those who don't know, between the watcher and the watched, is imbalanced. The truth of the matter is that most of us are on the short end of the bargain. We must understand that the big money in the digital economy is not in the selling of digital devices. It is in the selling of information. It is not about upgrading technology from a BlackBerry to an iPhone. It is about tracking us, watching us, learning about us as much as possible for the purpose of predicting or manipulating our future behavior. Business and human rights in technology applies to two main types of businesses. The first is businesses that are technology providers, builders, developers. The second is businesses that have technological elements, particularly technologies that enhance the business process. The governance of technology does not mean to govern the internet or the online world alone. Governing the digital means governing data. Technology is but a means of data collection. It is only the interface. Technology is the tool where data is collected, processed, and used. Digital technological advancements simply make them easy and ubiquitous. The analogy I can give here is how we govern vehicle safety. You don't govern BMWs or Ferraris or Hondas. You govern any vehicle that transports people from one place to another. No matter what the means of transport is, road safety regulations are standard across the board. If you take cars, for example, no matter what the car, you still need to implement seat belts because it's the minimum safety standard. If you want to have a fancy seat belt, that's a different story. With digital technologies, it doesn't matter what the interface is between this world and the digital world. Underlying everything digital is data. So governing how data moves from one place to another, what data can or cannot do, what data should or should not be used, this is the key to technology governance. With a national action plan being a policy document, and if we succeed in taking advantage in our leadership in tech in this thematic area, this understanding of the digital world needs to be reflected. If we don't do that, the policies that we come up with will not be future-proof. Technology would always evolve. We will always come up with new toys to play with. If we come up with policies that are technology-specific, instead of policies that govern the root of everything digital, which is data, we will need a new policy every time a new technology emerges. That would simply be impossible. But if we recognize that what we need to govern in the digital economy and reality is data, the way that we govern data in IR 4.0 would be the same as we govern data in IR 5.0 or 6.0 and so on and so on. Okay. So as I've mentioned before, there are countries that have published their national action plans with some technological elements or components. However, the type of digital rights considerations being put in their national action plans are typically focused on the legislative side of things. Not to say that regulation and legislation are not important, but there is also a need for a technical translation of these rights so that programmers and developers can actually code it into existence. I can skip the specifics of the countries and go straight to the question, can can digital rights actually cut across different themes and parameters? So the important thing to note here is that social issues are not new. Technology simply amplifies or gives more boom to the social issues that we see today. They simply make it more obvious. Okay. So the social issues that we want to solve with technology should be understood as technology facilitating our solving of the issue rather than governing the technology itself. But we need to decide first what is the problem that we need to solve, and then we think about the technologies to solve it. Example of digital rights implementation across thematic issues. In terms of labor, digital technologies can be understood as a way workers access customers. So technology is the middleman, and so what has changed is not the nature of work itself, but actually the relationship between the people with the supply of the service and the people demanding the services. So this notion of a partnership between the technology companies and the people serving the technology companies, and technology companies reframing that relationship from workers or employees to partners in the system is actually a form of misclassification. So digital rights in the labor realm would look at that relationship between technology firms and the way that they treat people who they call partners. In the environment theme, for example, you can look at the impact that technology would have on the carbon footprint, digital carbon footprint on the planet. And we have seen reports of digital carbon footprint having big impact on climate change. As for good governance, digital technologies have the potential to combat corruption. With digital identity technologies, it would be easy to track people, to track who has done what and when, and that can serve as a means to combat corruption. However, privacy protections in this kind of instances have to be put in place. These are some of the examples of how digital rights can actually be applied to any topic or any social issue. I would like to go to the concept of how we are not just technology users, we are actually digital citizens. As digital citizens, we have to have the right ethos to understand our digital rights. As mentioned earlier, we are our data. Never forget that whatever digital entities in the digital world that are representing us are actually us. We are our data. Whatever happens to those data entities, good or bad, would also affect us. Human rights protection in the digital world means the digital rights protection of those data entities. This is what it means to have data-centric digital rights. Secondly, as digital citizens, users should not have to concern ourselves with the technology. We simply need to use the technology knowing that our human rights are protected by design. It is not fair to expect everyone to become a computer scientist or a technologist to ensure our rights are protected in the digital space. In the same way that we don't expect everyone to become scientists or to be walking around with litmus paper to ensure that the water we draw from our pipes is safe for us to drink. Everyone does not have to be architects or engineer to know that a building that we're entering is safe. We should not expect digital citizens or tech users to be experts in digital technologies to know that the tech is safe. And lastly, as digital citizens, we should reduce our dependence on remedy. Think of it this way: if you're not sick, then you don't need to go to the hospital in the first place. This does not mean that hospitals should not exist. Of course, legal remedies and access to justice should always be available and accessible. It is also a reality that legal remedies are expensive and time-consuming. It took more than 8 years for Edward Snowden to be vindicated for exposing the covert intelligence and spying of UK citizens in the European Human Rights Court. Not to mention the vast amount of human and financial resources that went into that legal exercise. We cannot expect everyone to have the same kind of resources. We cannot all be Snowdens and have that kind of support at every instance of digital rights violation. So we need to change the way that we think about the use of technology, essentially, and that should be reflected in whatever policy document that we have come up with, that we will come up with to govern technology, including a National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights. Thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you very much, Mariam. That was very interesting discussion, and thank you for walking us through on business and human rights. I hope everyone share the same opinion that I have, that it's actually clearer now, no, with your presentation, why we need to act and not wait for our governments or policymakers to do something about the digital space. And with that, this is actually the last input. So for those, I have a few questions prepared. Let me share my screen. One second. Continue. Okay, can you see is something sharing? Yeah? Can someone confirm?
Yes, it's on.
Yes, we can see it.
All right, okay, thanks. So I've prepared a few questions for John and Mariam, but also these questions are for the rest of us in the room. So maybe I'll start with John and Mariam for this. And then anyone who wants to join the discussion, you're very welcome to use the raise hand function. There should be one, I believe so. Can someone confirm me if there's one? If there is none on your end, just message in the chat and we'll include you into the space and discuss. I really, really encourage everyone to please, you know, share thoughts. Other people are also listening to us in the other platforms and channel of the IGF. So it's wonderful to get your opinions out in the open and get the ball rolling on this aspect. So yeah, John, since you raised your hand, what are your opinions about the internet? I know it was just a test of the raise hand function, but I'm gonna call you now.
Correct. Yes, I basically wanted to say, so for those who are looking for the raising hand, you have to go into the reaction button. And once you click on it, you will have the possibility of raising and lowering your hand. And shadowing what Len has just mentioned right now, we encourage you to express your opinion. We would like to hear a little bit more as well as what you have to say in the topic. Well, the internet concept to me is a concept that has been disturbing me for quite some time. It's not that I don't like internet, it's that we seem to have had an obsession in the past decade plus about everything has to be about the internet and everything has to be connected into the internet and every regulation has to be specifically linked to the internet. And I feel that that's a huge mistake that we've been making so far for a number of reasons. The first one, the internet may carry the name as it is. We are not quite sure it will be called exactly the same way in the years to come. And so having a number of documents that are just tied so specifically to that name, to that branding, concerns me in terms of, well, looking at, let's say, for instance, the different attempts from different governments to detach themselves from the internet, or to have their own firewall system, or a certain amount of control over the information that flows internationally into their national borders. What is it going to be stopping anyone to claim, you know what, I'm going to disconnect from the internet and claim that my national network does not belong to the internet. It's not the internet. It's just a national network that happens to be connected through a number of gateways only, exclusively those gateways, to the rest of the world, and therefore I don't want to consider myself as part of the internet. Well, legally speaking, good luck to try to enforce all the regulations and all the possible resolutions that we may have passed about the internet. There's a very tricky element there in the language that I find to be quite consequential, and I'm not sure if we've been tackling with that properly. And also comes the point that it seems as if only our data was only in the internet. Our data is actually stored in many other networks all across the world, with or without our knowledge and with or without our consent. What, you want to tell me that my data has different rights depending on different networks where it could be, just because there's a terminology, there's a naming problem in between? That's ridiculous. We need to adopt much more general terms, such as digital domains, digital spaces, whichever we want to agree upon. I'm not specifically in love with any term in particular. What I don't like is the fact that we concentrate on that. And also, there is this third element that I was mentioning as to everything has to be connected to the internet. In that regard, I'm much more penchant to what Mariam was mentioning before. The technology is a provider. It's a middleman. The objective is what you need to keep in mind, and the technology will offer you that possibility or not accordingly. Len, I believe, yes. And so the idea here is that when you want to design a specific system, you want to think exactly what was the intention for that system and for those services. So let me give you an example. A fisherman village, a fishing village by a coastline in the Philippines, for instance. They want to put together a system in order to have some IoT devices by the shore, capturing some weather forecasts and so forth. And they want to be able to analyze and predict whether tomorrow is going to be a good day to go and fish. Let's imagine for a moment that they have that system. Do they really require to be connected to the internet for that? Most of the information that requires is sourced locally. For as long as they would have their own network with their own services, with their own people maintaining the network, for as long as that functions, well, if it's connected to the internet, it's a plus. There's nothing against it. It shouldn't be an actual obligation, because it really limits the possibilities as to whether you're going to be able to bring communication lines all the way to that location or not. And you're going to tell me that just because you can't provide it with telecom services, they don't have the right to have access to technology and solve other problems through technology? That seems to be very paradoxical. And so there's kind of an obsession behind the concept of internet that I find very troubling, and that we start looking at things a bit more on the bigger picture and more towards what is it that we wanted to do with the internet to begin with.
Thank you, John. That's very insightful. Mariam, what are your opinions about the internet?
Thanks, Len. Technology, any technology is a tool. It is a means to an end. It's not an end to itself. And the internet is basically, it's a communication tool. It's a tool of communication. Before this, before the internet, we communicated also, but in different ways. A lot slower, but we still communicated.
Yeah.
So that today the internet has given us the ability to communicate a lot faster and a lot more. Like every single day we're producing an enormous amount of data. What has changed with digital technology is the fact that these data now can be collected and can be analyzed, and then they can create a digital profile of you out of all those data. And that is the thing that's being sold. So as we evolve, as our technologies evolve, the fundamental aspects of being a society, or the fundamental value of a democratic society doesn't change. It's just how the technology has been used to serve what purpose. In an authoritarian government, the internet or any technology will be used for authoritarian purposes. In a democratic government, the technology will be used for democratic purposes. So we really need to decide what kind of world do we want to live in first, and then we think about the technologies to pursue our goals.
Thank you, Mariam. We actually have a comment in the chat, and I'm not sure if Dika would like to, Tri and Dani would like to share about it. I mean, I know we have an interpreter in the room, so if there's a need for an interpreter, I think we can also facilitate that. Dika, would you like to speak and share about your thought? I did a quick, that's why there was a shift of screen earlier, because I wanted to do a Google Translate. Yeah. Okay, so please, Dewi, you're welcome to speak. Oh, she said she would translate in the English channel. Okay. Does that mean that you're going to speak here, or that's in another channel? Oh, she's in the English channel. Okay, awesome. All right. So I think with that, I believe that.
Right. So she's asking us to look into the English itself.
Okay. So technology. I'm just going to proceed to the next question so that we're not going to be delayed by technology.
Hold on.
You see something, Jean? So I guess in the live version,
I can hear you. We're just having a cross between Len asking me if I'm hearing something, and then the interpreter is also trying to translate to me in English to the English channel. I'm trying to understand exactly what was the translation of that. I just want to make sure that I understood. It was a statement. It wasn't a question, correct?
Yeah, it was a statement that the internet is a double-edged kind of
correct.
thing.
Yes.
Sword. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So I was still talking to the interpreter. Len. We're good.
Anyway, yeah. So we have actually a question. I don't know if Azga would like to speak using the microphone. If you would like to just switch on the unmute button and go ahead, but nonetheless, I will read your question. You wanted to ask about your opinion about Google initiative on privacy sandbox. There's much pressure on the use of cookies to record user activities that can infringe privacy. Google comes with privacy sandbox initiative. Do you think this can be a solution, or is just a new kind of pseudo solution to collect our data in a new way? Mariam, John?
So I take all of these things with a grain of salt at any given time, essentially because these big companies do not, I mean, they make business out of about not respecting human rights. That's the business model. There's no way to get around it. The privacy sandbox seems to be an interesting move. However, the problem that you're going to have with all of those solutions is inherent into to the very nature of the protocols that we use in the current, as we understand the internet. So the statelessness of those protocols that doesn't allow you to keep track of different requests, and you need to have methodologies on top of that to be able to customize, for instance, user experience. What do I mean by that? So if you get into a website, let's say a shopping website, and you start just browsing around products, what you will have is anonymous type of browsing, where the information is basically just being shown to you. But just the fact that you may have looked for, let's say, shoes, and you have 20 pages of results of 50 types of shoes products for each page, and you require to be browsing, moving to the next pages because you still don't find anything that you like, it does require for the server to know exactly what is the next information that is to be sent to you, based on the fact that you have already had an interaction with the web server, and you have been navigating across the web server. So there are ways to solve that without you requiring to identify yourself. That's why you can do anonymous browsing. But then comes the next point of conflict, which is, well, now I have a shoe that I like, and I want to proceed with the purchase. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to be providing information that identifies me, not just now during the moment of the purchase, but across time, so that I can actually do the tracking of whether the product has been sent to me or not. And so because of how protocols are implemented at the origin, without the ability to capture that nuance, to capture that particular tracking, we had to put on top technologies to be able to solve that issue, and came in cookies, which was basically has been kind of the undoing to the internet for the past couple of decades. Because cookies have been used in very nefarious ways, they got a very bad reputation, even though in certain cases they are absolutely justifiable to be used. They are not the best way to do it, but still, you can understand that if I want to provide a custom experience to a certain set of customers, then I need to be able to identify them, to even if it is just to change the color of the screen just for them, or to modify part of the user experience, the user interface. When Google has come up with, so the outcry for cookies have been going on for quite a moment, and it's not anymore the type of technology that you would like to use. There are other alternatives to that. And so Google's Privacy Sandbox seems to be an attempt to do that, but I would like to look into the small print of the technology to pay attention as to how much it is affecting third parties' ability to repeat the same nefarious behaviors while enabling Google to possibly do something equivalent and just, business as usual by providing you with the appearance that is going to be safe. I mean, unless they tackle with the technology element of the protocols themselves, any solution is going to be a patch. There's no getting around that. So I'm a little bit skeptic about the privacy sandbox from Google, and at this point I would call it a solution.
Mariam?
Yeah, I would like to add a little bit to that. Any initiative that does not actually give back the ownership of data to the owner of the data itself, which is us, it is essentially still the control of the data is still in someone third party. So I would say that any technology that comes out that does not recognize the source of your data, which is you, us, we, as the true owners of those data, where we get to decide whether or not we want those data to be where and when and distributed how, then it's what Azka is saying. It's a pseudo solution to privacy, because otherwise, for as long as we don't have access or ownership over our own data, then everything else will be decided for you, and that's not like a real sense of solution.
Right.
If I might add very quickly, I just went very, very quickly through the Privacy Sandbox website. I'm just going to put it as well in the chat for everyone to have a look into it. So this is a multi-stakeholder approach. And I mean, you go to the Privacy Sandbox proposals, and point number 4 is measure digital ads. So embedded into the concept itself, there is the idea of selling you ads no matter what. This is not about privacy, it's about just making up a little bit the situation so it doesn't look so scary, yet I'm still going to go on business as usual and figuring out ways to push advertisements into you. And so let it be clear, it's not only about, as Marian was mentioning before, it's not only about what they know about us, it's what they have learned about us and what they can predict about us and what they can trigger into us. A few messages above, I put a link to this short video, the Selfish Ledger. I absolutely recommend anyone who's interested on the topic to have a look at it. It's very short, it's 8 minutes, it's very good production. It's supposed to be leaked from the former Google X department, which was the kind of the next frontier type of department in Google, trying to test new things. That was a very cool concept, actually. And the story goes that it was a video commissioned to explore the consequences of massive obtention of data and how it could actually influence societies and what's the actual value of data in those circumstances. And one step beyond, what would be the responsibility of Google in that particular equation. You will see how easy it is just through an ad to obtain information from you that was absolutely unintended from you. So in the video, there's the example of the machine, or the concept of the machine that wants to know your weight. And for whatever reason, you haven't indicated your weight in any other of your social interactions or any other of the platforms that you've been using so far. So what it does is essentially, it triggers for you the consumption need to buy a scale, which happens to be a scale that connects online. For whatever reason, you need to have a scale that connects online. Somebody explained to me, but it's cool. But and the way they do it is, it's a fancy scale that connects with Bluetooth, and you can share the data with your friends on social media, whatever is the actual argument. And so the conning part here is that I know exactly your preferences on TV series, for instance. I'm putting an example on top of what's told in the video. And let's say that you're a fan of Game of Thrones. So I'm going to be generating real-time an advertisement about Game of Thrones plus a scale, because what I want is your weight. And I'm just going to be designing real-time with an AI a picture of a scale with the shape of a dragon, because they happen to know that you are very interested on the model of dragons. You like Daenerys, and you're interested in anything that has to do. And it comes with a very nice perk that when you connect your phone into the scale, if you are beyond your expectations, it will roar at you, and it will have very flashy animations on the phone. So exciting, so great. Buy. You go, you get enticed, they trigger your intention to purchase, off you go. The trick of the story is that the scale doesn't even exist. And the ad didn't even exist 1 second before it was generated for you. The machine knows exactly your preferences. It has generated that ad on the spot just for you, with your preferences in mind, with the kind of colors that are going to be triggering your attention, with the kind of messaging that is going to trigger your attention. So it clicks and it pushes the button for you to purchase. And the scale doesn't even exist physically. Once you have confirmed the purchase, is being printed out in 3D just for you. There's no need for me to do any market research. There's no need for me to do any single evaluation on whether a specific product is going to work or not. I just create the motivation, I generate it, I trigger the need for purchase, you buy it, you receive, you weight yourself, bam, the machine has your weight. No one was expecting that was the way it was used to be. You just saw an ad. But what was behind the intention of having the ad was a very different story. And that's where they're basically tricking us. So privacy sandbox, lullabies for me, but bedtime stories.
Okay. I have a second question. Actually, there are 5 questions prepared. How do you envision the future of technology in digital societies? Mariam, would you like to go first?
Thanks, Len. How do I envision digital? Well, first, I decide the value that I want to live in. Like the value of the society I want to live in is democratic. The society I want to live in is a society that respects my freedom. The society that I want to live in is a fair society that does not discriminate. So once we decide all the values that we want as a society, then we design the technology around us to actually convey that to us, to actually deliver those kind of values to us. As I've mentioned before, if you happen to have an authoritarian government, they would actually just adapt the technology to suit their authoritarian purposes. But if you have a democratic government, then you would actually have governments that are going to use technology to actually, get to the bottom of things. And an example of this has happened in the city of Barcelona, where the mayor of the city decided first. She won the election based on the fact that she wanted to solve the housing problem, and then she appointed a chief technology officer that understands her vision for her city. She wants the city to be democratic. So the city, the smart city that was designed was designed to get input from the society for policy making. So they could actually, so the chief technology officer, Francesca Bria, actually boasted the fact, and they actually have the right to boast about this because it actually happened, boasted the fact that 60% of the policies that are developed for the city of Barcelona came from the citizens of the city. Because the type of data that they get from the citizens, they acknowledge data ownership to the citizens themselves. So the technologies that they design to capture all this data also take into account that the owners of the data have the sole control over their data. For example, I am okay with certain data to be sent to the city council, but I'm not going to be okay for the same data to go to a business entity for advertising purposes, for example. So they actually created a system whereby you decide, the owner of the data itself decide whether or not where my data is going to go, because they treat the owners of the data as themselves, as we've been mentioning here, that we are our data. So if we care about our data, where it goes and things like that, then we need to start treating our data as part of us. And that's the kind of society I would imagine I would want to live in.
I also want to be in that kind of society you want to live in, Mariam. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Jean?
I would envision the answer to this question from the perspective, very similar to what Mariam was saying, from the perspective of I'm typically allergic to buzzwords, so this smart cities concept, where the ability of knowing exactly that my data belongs to me, that I have certain agency over it. To make an incision here, let's not kid ourselves. There's always going to be data that leaks, in one way or another. As in a digital format, we are sort of accustomed in a way to understand that certain systems may have a date of birth or our height or nationality or whatever it is, because we're filling out those forms. For instance, in a daily interaction, every time that we are interacting. So, for instance, if I didn't know you, Len, I could infer that you may have some problem in your eyes because you're wearing glasses. So information is being radiated out of us at any given time, and there's always information that is going to be leaking out of us, even without intentionally doing it. Now, aside from that particular, edge case scenarios, if you will, what you would want is, if you are going to be moving across different smart cities, you would want smart cities that are accommodating the data that you come with, basically your digital twin, and treat it with exactly the same type of care anywhere that you go. And this is not such a utopian thinking, because that's exactly what happens with, let's say, driving regulations. With the sole exception of those, in which lane you're driving according to which country you are, pretty much a stop sign is a stop sign. And, the color of the street light is the color of the street light. Red, green, and orange is universally understood. So there's not so much of a problem to actually reach to international consensus, so that when I'm moving from one place to another, the data that is collected from me, or the data rather that I'm providing, remains respected in every single environment. And so technology really technology was supposed to be that allows you to scale in efficiency while not scaling in dangers. That would be pretty much something that I would like to see when it comes to technology. And so you require, for instance, to do very complex calculations in order to do, well, let's take a daily example that everyone is right now in the middle of, let's say, distributing vaccines. You know, you require to have a lot of information in order to establish a logistic transportation of those vaccines. Just the distribution of it is just a challenge. You need to have information as to the different distribution population pockets in different places, what's going to be the status of the roads to be able to do the distribution, whether you have hospitals or centers that can be equipped to be able to provide the last mile distribution of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Information on itself is never really a problem. It's what you've done with it. The algorithmic transparency that I believe we have mentioned at some point is much more important than the data itself. Now, the data at any given time should be remaining under the view or the agency of whoever has been generating it, because otherwise, and it really, it's one of those concepts that I can't get my head around the cognitive dissonance between the advocates of consent that at the same time advocate that you are not the owner of your data. I hear a lot of those arguments, and I really can't get my head around that, because I cannot consent over something that I don't own. It goes in the word, it goes in the etymology of the word. Mm-hmm. And so how do you square that circle? I really don't get it. If consent is the core of every single data protection law that we're having, I need to only consent to everything that I know. I can't share with Mariam a car that I don't own. That would be basically stealing. That's the definition of stealing, giving it to her something that belongs to a third party. So yeah, I would like to see technology that embeds all of those things by design, so that I don't have to concern myself as to whether I'm going to be at risk or not. Life is complex enough as it is.
Thanks, John. How do you think we can engage stakeholders? I mean, especially, let's say, citizens.
Yeah, in the context of digital citizens, we are stakeholders the moment we have a digital footprint or a digital twin. The moment we have a digital identity, the moment you have Facebook, the moment you have Google, the moment you have Twitter, whatever it is that puts your physical body in the form of a physical format, you are already a digital self. You are already a digital citizen. And so whether you are aware of the fact or not, you are already a stakeholder. How can we engage them? Well, first of all, would be to be aware of the fact that, you know, the digital reality is a reflection of our own reality. If we want the technologies that we use to be non-discriminatory and fair, then it would have to reflect the values within the society itself to be fair and non-discriminatory. So everything starts from there. Everything starts from that choice. We have a choice whether or not we want to build the technology the way that it needed to be built, not just what we want, not just the kind of digital world we want, but the digital world that we need. Because if you ask an authoritarian government, they would probably want a very different world. So decide first the kind of digital world we need, and then we go from there. And that, to me, it starts from that awareness that we are already digital. We are, like John said, we are already cyborgs. We are no longer just human.
Actually, there's a question in the chat that also kind of relates to this question and relates to your answer, Mariam. But also John is welcome to respond to it. Is digital literacy part of the problem? Do we lack digital literacy? Is there a lack in digital literacy? Because many people, is not aware of a lot of issues. That's what Adli is also saying here. A lot of people are not aware of the issues related to data, tech, privacy. Do you recognize a gap? Is there a huge gap? Is it a big gap? Is it a small gap? Is it a gap we imagine?
Yeah. Definitely, definitely. And digital divide is not just about having access to digital technologies, but also um, the way that technologies are designed for people with different abilities. Like if you are a blind person, how would you use a smartphone? That is also part of that problem,
Literacy.
digital divide. It's that access, that gap, right? As for digital literacy, I would say that the literacy is not just on how to use the tech technically. Like it's not just the technicalities of how to start a phone, how to switch it off, how to answer a phone call, how to open your Gmail. It's not just that, but also the philosophy behind the use of tech. We need to understand what we're using the tech for. Are we just using technology just for the sake of technology, or do we use it for a purpose? Because if we don't decide that, then the technologies that are going to be built for us are just going to be built based on what somebody else envisioned. As Facebook envisioned a society where everyone can be profiled and sold something at a price. Is that the kind of society we want? Is that the kind of literacy we want? So knowing that, being aware of that is also a form of digital literacy. So it's not just being aware of how to use Facebook and how to post a status, how to start a Facebook page for your business, but it's also about how does Facebook use my data to serve their interests, and then how am I going to be affected by it? If Facebook allows for political candidates to pay a whole lot of money to push for advertising to me, to other people around me, that are going to be persuaded to vote a certain way. What about political candidates who don't have the money to do the same? That's one. Secondly, what if the kind of political candidates that have the money are the kind of political candidates that believe in questionable policies? So directly or indirectly, you're going to be affected. So that is also a form of digital literacy.
John, is there a gap? Do people do not actually understand what we are in now in terms of data, tech, and privacy?
So when I was reading Adley's question, the first thing that always comes to mind is what I was mentioning before in terms of the fallacy of everyone has to be a hacker. So to me, it's not so much a matter of whether we have enough or less digital literacy, is how that digital literacy is distributed across what you would call the supply chain. So from the ones who design and implement to the ones who consume. And I go back to the example of the car. A user of a car, a driver, does not require to know anything about the technology under the hood of the car. At most, what they need to be trained, and that's their literacy in terms of being a driver, is how to drive the car, how to respect the rules, how to make sure they don't smash themselves against the wall, and how to make sure they don't smash others against the wall. That's basically as far as it goes. And so the problem to me has been how we've been transferring all the technical knowledge in that digital literacy for the final user, instead of keeping it where it should belong, which is the professionals. And keep it just there and contain it to the professionals, leave it in their hands. They're supposed to be the ones who are building it for us and just making us feel safe. And so anything that has to do with digital literacy when it comes to the final users, specifically citizens as part of a society, is, as Mariam was saying, if you receive an advertisement that you feel might be shy, etc. So understanding what's the power behind it in terms of from a user perspective. But what is the type of algorithms that are used in order to generate that input shouldn't be a problem. You have to concentrate on the fact that it might be affecting you. And that's the level of awareness. The same way that, when you get into a road and you drive across a city, your awareness system is different from when you drive in the countryside. Because in the city, you maybe have a ball, bouncing in front of you, and after a ball typically comes a child. But in the middle of the countryside, you may have a cow, or you may have just some other animals. The behaviors are different. Depending on where you are driving, you're going to have a different type of awareness system. Same goes with technology, depending on where you are interacting and so forth, but that remains on your element of responsibility as a user and as a consumer of the technology, not as the designer. And definitely not as you having to be the last line of defense as to whether regulations are properly implemented or not. And so, yes, Atlee, not everyone is aware about the issues related to data, tech, and privacy, etc. And that the understanding of privacy and the understanding of the nature of data and the understanding about what can you do with the device definitely is needed. And I would insist in things such as, okay, let me put an example. How is it so difficult to breach the comparison between my credit card number and my private key from my digital wallet, or my passwords? Seriously, I mean, it's very interesting for me how we distance one thing from another. So I may have an idea that if I have 3 different credit cards, I may want to have 3 different PIN numbers, because what if one falls into the wrong hands? I don't want to, I don't want anyone to be able to have access to the 3 PIN numbers, which are going to be the same, and extract money from the 3 cards. So you may have, in fact, that intention to do it. But for some reason, we use the same password for Facebook, Twitter, Google, and everything else that we're using. How does that square? It's that this dissonance that sometimes happens, and it has to do with this digital literacy understanding on what is behind but the implementation of it will be just perfect. Do not have to even concern yourself about passwords. That's the kind of technology that I would like to get behind, so that the actual generation of there's technology that can do that. Okay, I mean, I'm just talking generally. It would be great to be able to have a system that allows you to interact with a number of platforms and takes care of for you on your behalf of all the complexities in terms of generating new passwords, complex passwords, etc., even renewing the passwords for you on a regular basis, so that the chances for interception are even lower, etc. That would be something that you don't want to get into those details for the final user.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, John. I received a direct message question to the panelists. I'm not going to mention the person who asked. I understand this might have been sent for confidentiality. It's in relation to what we're talking about, digital literacy. So digital literacy and the government, basically. So the question is that there are two parts. So 2 questions, part of this statement. The first one is that how do we engage government for boosting digital related knowledge? Do you think, is there, like, in your experience, there like a window for that? Would government be interested in increasing citizens' knowledge on, or increasing digital literacy of citizens? And in relation to that question, it's a bit tricky. This is a bit interesting one. Do you think government should work with private companies to develop their websites and maintain their data? Oh, I think we lost Mariam just now. Yes, I think the question is that if government should work with private companies, and the government is the one, maintaining that private company's website and their data. What do you think, John?
I'm happy to answer that on the opposite sequence, because it sort of builds up the first, the second one, and then the first one. So should governments work with private companies to develop their websites and maintain their data? And I'm assuming that in here, the person who asked the question meant websites, but not only websites, but basically all type of technology that had to deal with data. So here's the thing. And again, we are confronted with another cognitive dissonance that I find very, very interesting, as if technology lived in a separate universe from the rest of things that we have already been doing for centuries. So when I want to open a physical shop in a jurisdiction, I need to comply with a number of regulations. I need to make sure that I have a place that is inhabitable, that has a number of square meters, that has a number of toilets, if there's, specifically for the employees, that has, that complies with security requirements, and then you have to go and get a permit, and then you have to register your company, etc. There's a number of steps to actually involve all of that. And those steps, despite the fact that people may see them as a hindrance, and sometimes they are, I'm not saying that the system is perfect, that's not my point, but they were set up at the very beginning for very specific reasons, and most of them were to protect citizens from scams. So, in order to be able to avoid someone to put together a small shop selling crap and things that are going to be absolutely counterproductive and possibly dangerous for a person, that company or that individual that wanted to sell that had to go through steps of verification, so that me entering the shop, I know that at least a certain degree of verification has been done already. Now, why are we not doing the same with technology? It still baffles me. So if I want to be able to sell an actual product, or I want to have a business representation in the territory, it shouldn't be just me serving the pages from the other place of the world. It should actually the company having their own service inside the jurisdiction. That would provide much more capacity to governments to shut down a business if shady practices are happening. And once you do that, you can basically start applying all the regulations in terms of protection for the citizens inside your jurisdiction. You have way more tools. And so you can start providing technical codes of implementation based on the data protection laws of your jurisdiction, which is where companies should be much more compliant too. And the segue from that second part to the first one is that in order to do that, you need to be able to involve programmers. You need to be able to look into not only what are going to be the regulations that you want in terms of protection, in terms of how to minimize data and so forth, but that has to be translated into a technical code. It doesn't get properly implemented otherwise. And in the same way that you have a standard way for everyone, corruption aside, okay, I mean, really, we're talking about utopian or hypothetical best case scenarios here, where everyone has to abide by the same regulations in order to open a physical shop. Well, and you have the methodology to verify whether they are compliant or not. You actually send an inspector, go check over there. Yeah, that's correct. And you have your checklist. And once you're done, you get your certificate. The same should happen when it comes to software. Unfortunately, right now, anyone can just put together a piece of software, release it into the ether, and good luck finding me if it's doing something that is not complying with regulations. That's extremely dangerous.
Right.
Marian, you want to put up something there?
Maybe just something really quickly. It doesn't really matter who is managing what data. What matters is how the data is going to be managed. So as long as there are limitations to protect data from abuse or from any misuse, whoever manages the data, either the public sector or the private sector, then they will have to follow those rules. What we're protecting is the data entity itself, and there needs to be legal backing for that. Because if we do all these things without any legal any legal support, then any kind of abuse may not hold in court. For example, in Malaysia, the Personal Data Protection Act does not actually apply to government entities. So even if governments actually take care of the data, even if governments don't actually hire private companies to take care of data, but the Personal Data Protection Act does not apply to them. So whatever happens to them, then whatever abuse that if we even find out, then who's going to hold them accountable for it, because there's no legal basis for that. So it's not about who, but it's about how. Yeah.
Thanks, Mariam. This is the second to the last question for you guys. What do you think is our biggest challenge?
I believe you haven't changed the slide then.
Oh, really?
Yes,
is it there now? Yeah. What do you think is the biggest challenge?
John, you want to
paradigm shift. Yeah, the paradigm shift.
John, what do you mean by paradigm shift? Of whom and yeah.
Well, the fact that we got very, I'm not going to say comfortable, just, you know, whatever you repeat, you excel at it. Whatever you keep repeating, you become exceedingly good at it. And right now we've been very good at pushing the responsibility into the shoulders of the users when it comes to verifying compliance for each of one of the rights that they have in technology. And we have excelled in detaching technologies from responsibility, and we have excelled on making sure that technologies don't want to talk with policymakers. We have excelled on making policymakers totally disinterested on learning technology because sometimes they feel it's hocus pocus or too much for them to understand. And in the same way that every single convergence of two radically different topics ended up having people who were able to learn how to bridge those things and become specialists so that they could actually communicate into both places. That's the kind of things that we're going to need to change. I'm going to give you an example about the 80s and the 90s, which I find very telling. With the explosion of personal computing back in the 80s and the 90s, there was this huge avalanche of magazines dedicated to personal computing. PC Magazine, PC Weekly, program this, program there, language of computing, blah, 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 video games, whatever it was. A huge explosion. Now the question here is, was it journalists who learned about technology, or was it technologists who learned how to write? And I can tell you it was much more the second type. In a saturated market where too many programmers were competing for the same positions, all of a sudden there was a huge market in the journalism magazine, it's not so much journalism, but magazine sector that was demanding for that kind of knowledge. And it was easier and it was much more profitable for them. They could make much more money on having a career writing or programming than actually programming. We need to have that transfer between programmers feeling enticed to move into civil society and to move into making changes in how technology is done. And it's going to be by two different types of arguments, whether it's going to be an ethos, as in I see a concept that I want to get behind, I see something that deserves my attention, and I think I can make a change. But in order to do that, you need language to describe it, as I was mentioning before. And second, the possibility of making a career out of it. Mm-hmm. If it's difficult for traditional human rights activists and defenders to make a living as things go, try to compete with the likes of a startup or a big company who's going to be able to put a lot of money on the table in order for you to enter into a position, even if it's just as a low-level programmer. There's probably not going to be any competition there. So those challenges are going to be extremely complex to tackle, and there has to be much more understanding. I would say that right now, civil society funders have started to understand the importance of infrastructure. I yet don't feel they have taken the next step, which is to understand the importance of those who build the infrastructure, which is very much at the beginning of the conversation. The infrastructure is still mid-level on the problematic. You have to go all the way to the source, and the source is the programmers, the architects, the technologies themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mariam, what's our biggest challenge?
My answer is similar to John's. Our biggest challenge is here in our thinking. But let me explain a little bit what I mean by that. You see, as we've mentioned, technology is a tool. It's an interface. It is, you know, your laptop, your phone is how you enter into a digital world. Mm-hmm. And you can build that digital world, or you can even build your own digital profile the way that you want it to be built. But the fundamental question then comes, why do you want to build that digital world? And what kind of digital world that you want to build? That question should be answered first before we even think about what technology should be used. So the way that we think about technology right now is about the latest gadget, IR 4.0, smart city, IoT, blockchain, artificial intelligence. We talk about all of these things. Technologies that may even become absolute in the near future. China, for example, they don't talk about artificial intelligence anymore. They now talk about comprehensive intelligence. So if we have laws or legislations that specifically targets artificial intelligence, what happens when AI becomes obsolete? And then we're going to need a different law in order to circumvent the harms that might exist with the new technologies that come along. So understanding where that technology is, that portal. Technology is just the interface, but what needs to really be governed is the data that powers the technology. That is our biggest challenge, because legislations are still not yet catching this, or understanding that the digital reality and the analog reality are not the same, even though they are connected. So the problem that we then have is the problem of you basically are exploring territories that you're basically trying to navigate territories that are not based on the right map. Mm-hmm. As the saying goes, that the map is not the territory. The map that we have right now to understand the digital reality is the map of the analog reality. When in fact the digital reality works differently. It's probably a different map. If you go on into the digital world, you might not find an actual river in a place where they say there's a river, but a representation of that river is there. So when you go to the digital reality of yourself, you meet your digital self, for example. Imagine meeting your digital self, and then that digital you somehow is not really you, and yet the laws and regulations are designed to protect a different side of you. You know what I mean? So yeah, so because data is invisible, okay, this digital reality is something that cannot be seen with the naked eye. There needs to be a new imagination, a new way to see these things from a perspective.
I think we lost Mariam again. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Looks like.
Yeah, she'll try to reconnect. Okay, so just to move forward, and so we still have a little bit of time for closing later. We have this, okay, she's trying to return. Let us give her a little bit of time.
I'm sorry, am I back?
Yeah, you're back, yeah.
Sorry,
what was that? Finish the statement? Yeah.
The imagination, that we need to understand that technology is not just a product. Technology is not about the iPhone. It's not about the MacBook. It is a way of thinking. Technology is about knowledge that is put into practical use to solve the problems that we face, problems that prevent us from living our best life. To think technologically is not just to think about AI, robots, and machines, but it's to think about structure, is to think systematically, methodologically to solve problems. And then you figure out what tools you want to bring in to solve the problem. There is really no point in having access to the latest and the most advanced technology without the purpose to use them. Or if actually there's worst thing that can happen. The worst thing that can happen is building the technology to suit the wrong goals or the wrong purposes. Most technologies are built under the context or the pretext of military purposes in order to wage wars. How did we get to internet? It was designed for actually military purposes to begin with. So I would say our biggest challenge is to understand the philosophy, the technological philosophy behind the technologies that we use. That's why philosophy actually has a very high place in science. scientists, technologists, developers, programmers, they also have to start looking into these kind of things so that they can actually imagine new ways of being. So there's no, we shouldn't have that stigma, you know, where technologies is only about math and science and they don't think about society or politics and things like that. Actually, everything has to come together because everything is connected.
Thank you, Mariam. I'm just checking on the time and it's 3:18 at the moment. So I'm just gonna ask this last question and also ask you both to give your closing statements in relation to this question and additionally your closing statements. Yeah, so all of this time we've been discussing about, you know, the developments in technology, how we're actually unprepared about it, how very few have considered or given importance on data being us, a representation in the digital space, rather many, or not even many, but most of the companies or all of the companies are utilizing those data for interests, for their own interests, either monetary or business or in other form. So in that context of the discussion and in the context of looking forward, you know, to achieve that goal of increasing the trust to technology from 5 down to probably 5 up, or at least just 2 steps higher, and to recognize that, you know, majority of us here said that technologists are very important. And in the context of the IO Foundation's Principle 2 and End Remedy, how can tech prevent harm? Like, what are very specific action points or examples that tech can actually prevent harm? John?
I'm not sure if my answer is going to be any simple because I keep looking at things from a technical perspective. And so to me, the answering that question starts by being able to first have a taxonomy of what harms you want to avoid. Because if you don't know exactly, if you don't know exactly what is it that you're trying to avoid, as Mariam was mentioning before, you're not going to be able to create technology around that concept in a preemptive way to avoid having to have remedy. So just to be clear on one thing. So one reason why you need to have a taxonomy on digital harms from the perspective of, from the point of view of the IO Foundation is in the perspective of data, is because, as I was mentioning before, data in itself is not the problem. It's what you do with the data that can cause a problem. So let's say, for instance, as an example, that you and I share the knowledge that Mariam committed a crime. You know, she killed someone last summer, like in the movie, like I know what you did last summer. And is Mariam at risk because you and I know that piece of information? No, not quite. She could be at risk if we decide to go to the police. So having the piece of information of that particular thing that could be potentially harmful for her does not necessarily mean that it's going to be weaponized against her. It's the decision-making process about that piece of information. So when I think about data, of course, you want to protect it, but I'm much more interested on what is the algorithm that's going to be applied to the data and how the data is going to be transformed or exchanged with other parties based on the decisions made on those algorithms. And you want to be able to quantify what an algorithm is doing and whether it's bringing you closer or farther from a specific harm. But in order to do that, you need to be able to list those harms prior. You need to know exactly what it is that you're trying to avoid. And so for me, the first step is to be able to have once and for all an actual study. You know, I was surprised the other day. I was having a conversation with an expert on standard and on AI regulations and standard bodies. And despite the fact that most regulations always describe language such as the amount of data to be exchanged should be based on the use case scenario. My first question to him was, well, where is the taxonomy about the different kinds of case scenarios? Because if you give me already a taxonomy, then we can start having a conversation about what data can be used for which particular usages, et cetera, and everyone can get, and he told me, well, I don't believe that there is any. So we're issuing regulations without any common standard to begin with for fundamental things, and that's going to be very, very difficult to tackle. I mean, I would like to be corrected. If anyone ever sees this recording or is in the session and can point me out to that particular taxonomy, I'm more than happy to be informed about it. At this point, it really shocks me. And so being able to prevent harm is going to start by first deciding what are the harms that we want to avoid by any means, and then we can start building from there.
Thanks, John. Mariam?
Yeah, John pretty much said what I wanted to say. I think I will just go ahead with my closing statement, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've actually prepared like three points as a closing. The first point is on the reason why business and human rights, or human rights in business, actually matter. It matters because our businesses are run by people, and the customers of our businesses are also people. So when you take care of people, your business will be taken care of. You know, that's the logic. And if you neglect caring for people, sooner or later, people will just move away from your business. So it actually makes business sense to care about the human rights implications of your business, and the human rights implications that the technology that you use to propel your business can have on people. So that's one point. Secondly, what does it matter? What does this mean for the tech industry? Protecting human rights in technology, what does that mean? It definitely goes, first of all, it definitely goes beyond data protection. It goes beyond responsible business conduct. Protecting human rights in technology means privacy by design. It means user control of their own data. It means the technical assurance that their data will not be abused. For example, if we tell Facebook or Instagram to delete what they know about us, we should be able to do that with just the click of a button. Okay, we shouldn't have to do that with by having to wait for them to do it for us, or even tell that, or even them telling us that they've done it, but there's no way for us to actually check if they've actually done it. So that technical assurance is really necessary in this sense. And the application of human rights in technology has actual business value. Technology practitioners, including digital marketers in the advertising industry, they have control over their decisions, such as who to actually give their advertising money to, who do they want to give this ad budget to. And they have control over giving business to platforms that do not actually address human rights abuses that happen under their watch. For example, I've heard friends in the digital marketing industry actually talk about moving away, slowly moving away from Facebook, and already looking for other avenues or other places where they can actually move their ad budget to. Even with that little awareness, as human beings, we actually naturally don't want to support people or businesses that do not respect the human rights of others. And new technologies are actually already being developed to provide technological solutions to human rights protection in the digital space. I've mentioned a few examples earlier with some technologies, but I can mention them again. For example, self-sovereign identities, or IRMA, I reveal my attributes, technologies that protect and respect human rights without damaging the business bottom line, which is profit. Increasing the trust in your digital business means increasing business. Increasing trust in digital government services means increasing trust in institutions. So for both the public and the private sector, it is a win-win situation if you actually protect human rights in the digital space. And my last point for the closing statement is that we must redirect our attention to technology. As we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic, we should learn by now that people are beginning to realize how deeply integrated technology is in our daily lives. It can be in our education, it can be in our business, it can be in our work, it can be in our personal life. Initially, tech is all about the do no harm. Today, that's no longer enough. Today, technology has to be actively involved in anti-harm and the proactive elimination of harm at the earliest stages of technology conceptualization. And those are the 3 points that I wanted to highlight in my closing statement. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mariam. Thank you, John. Thank you, IGF Southeast Asia, for this opportunity to be part of this session. We're really happy that you stayed with us all this time. It's already 3:28 in my watch. We're 2 minutes before closing, before the end of the session. We've posted in the screen a QR code to Tech Up Weekend. We encourage you to be part of that conversation. Please scan the QR code and join us. It happens every month on a weekend, and it runs across three different time zones. Definitely this one for Asia. So without any further ado, you can also visit our website, www.theiofoundation.org. You can also visit us at LinkedIn, check Twitter. We also do some posts from time to time, but most information you can find in our website and at GitHub. So yeah, if you need any more information, you can click the link that John posted in the chat. So thank you, everyone, and have a nice rest of the IGF.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Keep safe over there.
Rating so well.
Recording.